Live looping is one of the most liberating ways you can express yourself as a musician. Every layer of the loop is under your control, and with the right setup, you can take your performance anywhere you want to. I've explored and developed my own looping setup within Ableton Live, which incorporates 3 methods of looping. And in this video, I want to show you all 3 of these and help you create an original creative looping setup for yourself. I'll start by showing you a method for unsynced pedal looping, then we'll get into quantized MIDI looping, and finally we'll combine ideas and expand upon them by building a more complex multi-looper, which you can adapt to any of your needs. If you want to follow along or tinker with my specific setup, I've made the project file available on my Patreon, where you can support me for a monthly fee and get access to awesome bonus content. That way you can dissect my entire setup at your own pace or adapt it directly for your own use. Diving in, method 1 explores the concept of unsynchronized looping. In this use case, I want to record a quick idea and then maybe sing or solo on top of it. I imagine most beginners will want to start with this approach, as this method is the most like a simple loop pedal, and it's the fastest way to start performing. I actually have a guitar pedal that does just this right here. Okay, this is actually a delay pedal, but it has a simple loop function built in, and it works by setting it to hold, its loop function, and then tapping the pedal. To make this work in Ableton, we're going to be using Ableton's looper audio effect, and then set it up as if it were a simple foot pedal like this one. So here in Ableton Live, we can search for the looper or find the audio effect in the delay and loop folder. Drag or double click looper from here to the track you want to record and loop with. In this case, I will put the effect on a new audio track, which will have my guitar as an audio input source. In the looper, you can see that the top half of the interface shows a display area, and the bottom half holds all the different buttons you can use to set the effect up to your taste and start looping. By default, the looper is set to sync up with your live set. For our purposes, however, we want to perform more freely, without metronome or being synced up to the project's grid. To record and playback independent of the project, we need to set both song control and tempo control to none. By doing this, the looper won't trigger any playback of the project itself, nor will it pay attention to the tempo, the BPM, of the project to determine the tempo of the recorded material. We also need to set quantization to none, so the looper starts recording the instant we hit the record button. Now this is a personal preference, but I also like to turn feedback down a smidge, about 10% or so the recorded loop will drop a tiny bit lower in volume than anything I might overdub, that is, record on top of the existing loop. I keep the record length at the default X bars because I want to manually control the length of the loop, but I do change it to switch to play instead of overdub after recording the first loop. If you want to immediately add another layer on top, you can leave this on overdub. Okay, the looper is set up in a way that makes sense for my specific performance idea, so let's give it a go. The big transport button functions quite similarly to how you would go about operating live in general, as well as the guitar pedal I compared it to at the start. By hitting it, the looper's display area turns red, and the effect records audio incoming from our input until we hit another button. I'm mapping this button to a MIDI controller, in my case a foot controller, as I won't have my hands free while playing my instrument. By hitting the transport button again after recording, the looper starts playing back the material that we recorded into it. Now the button looks like a plus symbol, and we can hit it again to overdub and add additional layers of audio to the existing audio loop. To stop the loop, we can either hit the big transport button twice, or hit the stop button just underneath the display. The transport button then turns into a play button again, which, if we hit it, will simply start the loop again. By pressing and holding the button, we can either undo or redo a recording if the looper is playing back, or clear the entire loop if the looper is stopped. Personally, I like to press the button twice while holding it on the second press to clear the looper. This seems to work better for me because it prevents any accidental playback, which I want to ensure during a live performance. The looper also has a dedicated clear button, but since I'm mapping the main multi-purpose transport button, I don't have to use this in my setup. However, it's there if you need it, and you could always map it to your controller as well. Alright, method 2 takes us to Ableton's session view, where I will use a MIDI track. In this case, I want to program a simple drum beat that will be synchronized to the set. To do this, I put a drum rack on the new MIDI track and hit record on the empty clip slot. I can now use something like a MIDI controller or my computer keyboard as the controller to play in the drums. This will record any MIDI data onto that clip until I hit play again. To have a bit more control, however, we can double-click on an empty clip slot before recording. This creates a MIDI clip which is automatically set to a 1 bar or 1 measure length. The notes in the clip view are represented by the keys of a piano, which in turn will represent one of the drums in my drum rack. If we go back to it, we can see that my bass drum, or kick, is set to C1, which Ableton automatically gave the name of the drum in the clip view. In this view, I can now click in my pattern, or draw it in by hitting B, which is the shortcut for the pencil icon in the top right corner of Ableton Live. Okay, this is all really simple stuff, but I promise we can make it more musically interesting again. By pre-making our clips, we were able to set the clips up with the exact parameters that we want, such as the clip length. We probably don't want to be drawing in notes on our laptop, however, while performing live, and we probably want a bit more control over our performance by using something like a MIDI controller again. To do this, we can hit the session record button and overdub on top of the empty clip we've just created. This same session record button can be toggled to stop overdubbing. We can also select the notes we recorded in and hit Command U or Control U on Windows to quantize them. If you're anything like me and you're not the best drummer or insecure about your performance, you can also pre-select a quantization method to help you lock onto the grid a bit better. Technically, we could have recorded the MIDI drums into a looper, similar to how we have in Method 1. Loopers can be placed on both audio tracks and MIDI tracks after all, so why don't we use a looper to record in our MIDI performances? The main issue is that we can't make any small adjustments to our performance once it's recorded into the looper. Quantization becomes impossible for one, but also if we want to break a drum performance down by eliminating its layers, we can more easily do this with this new MIDI method. A setup like this can be achieved simply by duplicating recorded clips underneath each other and then adding new drum layers in each new clip. I find I typically use method 1 for audio and then method 2 for MIDI looping. Both allow me to get my ideas down quick and easy. With MIDI, it's particularly easy to start adding more instruments to your performance, and so it's a great step forward for your live sets. Of course, Ableton is more flexible than what I've shown you here, so be sure to keep experimenting with the two different approaches and see how you can make them work in your own setup. An acoustic singer-songwriter setting is vastly different from your experimental noise projects. For method 3, we've reached a point where we're starting to get a hang of this whole looping thing. At this point, we want to record, control, and play back multiple layers at once. In my case, I want to record my guitar, but I also want to keep playing around with my tone and maybe have different effects going on different layers of the loop. I also want some drums, and I want to be able to control when each layer comes in and out of the performance. In other words, we need to construct a multi-looper that allows us to run multiple versions of method 1 and method 2 together. This is where the real fun and experimentation begins, by the way. In order to build a multi-looper out of our current setup, I'm going to create multiple audio tracks, each with their own loopers. However, I do not exclusively want to record guitar. Instead, I want the loopers to potentially record any instrument I have connected to my set. To make this work, we're going to have to think about how we're going to route the entire system. We could output all of our instruments to the same loopers, but this means we can't perform them on their own track anymore, because their audio is being sent directly to the track that holds the looper. Alternatively, our looper track could be set to take audio from another track, specifically the one we want to loop. But tracks can only have a single input in Ableton, and so a few problems quickly present themselves. One way around this is to create empty audio tracks for each instrument per looper. Let's say we have a guitar, keyboard, and microphone in our set. These are our main tracks. Now for the looper, we create 3 empty audio tracks, each which take either the guitar, keyboard, or microphone track as an input. These 3 tracks can now be grouped together with Command G or Control G on Windows. The group track will receive audio from all the tracks it contains as a group. This means we can place the looper on the group track and record audio from any and all of the 3 tracks in the group. Mind you, we could probably also set this up with return tracks, but we'll be creating a lot of tracks. And so I find this approach to keep your set the most structured and easy to work with, which is crucial during a performance because we already have so much else to think about, right? As you've likely noticed, our audio has suddenly doubled, increasing the overall volume of our initial audio track. This is not a desired result, and we can prevent this by turning our looper's input to output control to never. This means the input on that looper is never heard, and we only hear the material that the looper recorded once it's playing that back. By the way, for these loopers, I leave the feedback on 100%, as I likely won't be overdubbing much on them. This time I also set the tempo control to follow the song tempo, as I want them to sync up with my project. For the same reason, I leave quantization to global, but you can adjust this to taste. Great, so we have one looper totally set up. Now we can simply duplicate it to the total amount of loopers that we want for our set. In my case, I want 5 of them, as I have a row of 5 buttons on my MIDI foot controller. Now we can start to individualize these loopers by adding specific effects to each one. I want to start by adding a simple auto filter to all of them, which I can control with a knob on my MIDI controller. By doing that, I can filter out the audio of my loops with a low-pass filter to build dynamic interest over time during a performance. To not have 6 different versions of the auto filter effect running, however, let's group all the loopers together with Command G again and put a single audio effect on the master group. This will save us resources. As for looper 1, I want to be able to record an alternative loop, which we'll call looper B, which I can switch to from the other loop, and I'll call looper A. That way, I can easily switch between 2 different chord progressions in case I want to have 2 distinct sections in my songs. To do this, I group the initial looper audio effect with Command G as well. As you can see, this created an audio effect rack, which holds a chain with the looper on it. To create looper B, I will now simply duplicate the chain and rename both of them. Using Ableton's MIDI mapping again, I connect the play button of looper A to a button on my foot controller, which I also map to the stop button of the other looper. For the other, looper B, I do the opposite and map it to another button on my controller. Now when I hit the first button, it presses record or play on looper A while pausing looper B, and if I hit the second button, it records or plays looper B while pausing looper A. Of course, I can pause the running one without triggering the other by double tapping the button mapped to its transport button. I will likely use looper 2 as the one I record bass onto, and so this one won't need any further adjustment. Looper 3 I will think of as my harmonic layer, and looper 4 will be my melodic layer. I sometimes like to gate my melodies sidechained to the hi-hats of the drums to create some interesting sounds. Right now that's a bit outside of the scope of this video, but you can see here that the point is that you can adapt each looper to have its own specific chain of effects. Finally, looper 5 will serve as a track for additional, more ambient sounds like pads. None of this is set in stone, however, and as you go on to experiment and perform with your setup, you're gonna want to make changes here and there. What's important is to think about your intention a bit in advance. What would you ideally like to do with your performance? Knowing this and then logically setting it up with the right sounds and effects, you'll also know how best to map your MIDI controller and what each button of it represents during your performance. And that's it, all methods embedded in a single set that you can fully arrange for your own songs. I hope this was helpful. Please let me know in the comments what you end up doing for your own looping setup. Once again, you can find my project file on Patreon, where I made a version for you using only stock Ableton plugins. Feel free to reach out with any questions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.